Mouin, is there anything kind of less significant you'd like to discuss until folks join us?
Sure. You were asking me about what's next, or should I wait with that?
What? No, no. I'm saying, is there? Can we do some banter until
Oh,
people
yes.
where
Yes. Let's
people are
banter.
beginning to, yeah, banter.
Mhm. Okay. I'm bantering. You?
أنا تمام. أنا منيح. Okay, and they're okay. Lisa's joining. So, hi, Lisa. All right.
Hi, Lisa.
I'm Wayne. Good intro. Thanks for setting me up.
Lisa, can you move your camera down so your head is at the top of the screen? Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We are waiting as people join us. أنو شو هيدا أنو؟ معقول هيدي كلمة؟ All right. Apologies again to everyone. We are also in a bit of shock, but maybe we should start experiencing what many others experience. Lisa, I am assuming you were listening. Mouin was addressing the actual ruling, the context before actually addressed the context that within which the ruling took place. Then he addressed the ruling and a number of matters related to the ruling, including some of the legal and political matters. And then now we were moving to him discussing the question
Next
of
step.
what's next,
Yeah.
right? And I'll let him finish because we had started, and then we'll bring you into the conversation. Lisa Hajjar and Mouin Rabbani, besides being remarkable speakers and scholars and many other things, they actually are co-editors of Jadaliyya as well. So Mouin, I think we can safely resume and others will pick up where we left off, either from the video or
Yeah.
they can join us.
Okay. Well, just to briefly conclude, Israel is required to submit a report to the court within 30 days. The court will assess that report, and on that basis, may also impose additional provisional measures on Israel if it finds that report unsatisfactory. And then I think it will begin to schedule a full hearing in which not only South Africa and Israel will make their case before the court, but also any other state that is a party to the Genocide Convention has the right to submit an intervention on behalf of either South Africa's claims or Israel's claims regarding this case. And speaking of third parties, I think it's also important to note that the ruling issued by the court yesterday is binding not only on South Africa and Israel, the parties that are most directly concerned with this case. It is in fact binding on each and every signatory to the Genocide Convention. And so it also has implications, for example, for the United States, which has, as many people have pointed out, is for all intents and purposes a co belligerent in Israel's genocidal onslaught on the Gaza Strip. Um, it has implications for countries like the Netherlands, which has been providing spare parts for the F-35s that Israel has been using for the killing field, for the mass killings it has been perpetrating in the Gaza Strip, and for all kinds of other reasons. So, it does put these governments on notice, but I think that's not how the rules-based international order works. The way it works is that international law and international obligations are only sacrosanct when they're meant to be respected by adversaries and enemies. And Western states feel themselves immune from having to respect or implement such rulings and provisions of international law.
We will actually continue this line in just a minute. I just want to bring in Lisa Hajjar, who is a professor at UCSB, and we'll ask you, Lisa, about your comments. I mean, we are doing this today as an informal conversation. We also had asked a few other people to join, but because of the strict timeline, not everyone could join today, but we will be continuing this conversation tomorrow at noon with Diana Butu and Mohin and others as well, potentially. So I'd like to ask you about your impressions of what you have witnessed, as well as your expertise in this realm. If you could add to what has been discussed regarding the ICJ ruling.
Well, I think the most important thing, and Mouin sort of touched on it, is the issue of like not recommending a ceasefire. And I think that there are a lot of people who are understandably disappointed that the ICJ did not order a ceasefire as they had in Ukraine v. Russia. But it's the reason for that, I think, really is implicated in the nature of the ICJ and this conflict. And as disappointing as that might be, because that was the biggest ask in the South Africa application, if, as Mouin just said, all of the signatories, act now in accordance with what was ordered in terms of provisional measures, there will either have to be some kind of a ceasefire because of, international pressure for states that want to abide by their own obligations, or probably much more likely, it really helps galvanize this global movement for a ceasefire. I mean, it has now the kind of foundational backing that there is plausible reason to say that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. So I think that in those regards, people who may be disappointed should at least see that this is, the ICJ can never really, law won't save us, but the law can give us a tool, to sort of work for, these types of measures. I also think that there's incredible misunderstandings. I've just read the United Kingdom's official response, just so laughable, and listening to John Kirby, U.S. spokesperson, in terms of what this means, what the ruling means. So I think Jeremy Scahill put it really succinctly in a post on Twitter, was that he's saying that people who are claiming, well, the ICJ didn't find Israel guilty of genocide, it's like nobody is found guilty at an arraignment. Like, this is really the equivalent of an arraignment. And so, you'd think that there might be some people with a law degree somewhere in the workings of, the United States or the United Kingdom's, higher echelons. But I think that this is something, what's also, just as a teacher, what I think this moment is so important. I mean, it's tragic. I mean, that we have to learn at the expense, such a high expense of Palestinian lives and society. But this has been an incredible learning experience for people, especially younger generations, to think about, sort of what international law is, what the International Court of Justice is, what genocide is. How do we make these kind of cases? How do we, sort of think and talk about them? You don't need to be a lawyer to understand these issues. You really just, in a sense, need to, sort of follow the right people, read Mouin's tweets and read other people's things to understand what is happening. This is an incredible educational experience. I know that in my own classes, I'm teaching this sort of on an ongoing basis.
Thanks, Lisa. We actually have quite a few smaller topics or other topics to discuss. But Moin, is there anything you'd like to finish with regarding the legal process and what's next? And before we get to the implications for a number of other developments that now.
No, I think Lisa pretty much covered it, so we're good.
Okay. There is an interesting. Well, we have your comments, Mouin. One of the reasons I had wanted to speak with you also is the commentary that you have, which frankly went viral, as many of your commentary does, and it now is living on Jadaliyya under the title "Ongoing Quick Thoughts" with Mouin Rabbani. You made several comments that I'd like to bring in and ask you to comment on them, so that we can continue this conversation and develop the topic. You had commented. Let me bring this in first. 1 second. All right. Can you
That
see?
wasn't me.
Sorry. Can you see this?
Yes.
All right. So we have, and let me bring you guys in so that everybody's in the picture. طيب. We have a set of comments. You talk about how this court ruling has certain significances, which you addressed, but you also say something about history with a capital H was made today as of 26 January. Israel and its Western co-sponsors can no longer mobilize the Holocaust to shield themselves from accountability for their crimes against the Palestinian people. And then you address Raz Sigal, a professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies, recently made the point that the Israeli state was born in impunity, with the Holocaust serving as an all-purpose shield against accountability for its crimes. No more. Can you say more about this?
Well, I think in the public imagination, and certainly in the West, the establishment of the Israeli state is not seen as the fulfillment of a colonial enterprise that was conceived in the late 19th century and brought to fruition under the watchful assistance of British imperialism during the interwar period. Rather, many people tend to see, the Nazi Holocaust took place from 1940 to 1945. The Israeli state was established in 1948, and they assume a causal connection between the two. In other words, the establishment of Israel is, for many in the public imagination, seen as a form of reparation for the extermination of the Jews of Europe by the Europeans during the Second World War. And I think what Professor Raz Siegel, the point that he's trying to make is that because of this causal connection, at least as it exists in the public imagination, um, the Israeli state was born in a state of impunity. In other words, because of the Holocaust and because Israel is seen as compensation and reparation for the Holocaust, part of those reparations were that it could have its way with the Palestinian people. It could ethnically cleanse them in 1948. It could occupy the remainder of mandatory Palestine in 1967. It could colonize the West Bank and the Gaza Strip with hundreds of thousands of illegal settlers living in illegal settlements. It could supervise the Sabra Shatila massacre in 1982, and so on and so on and so on. And it was all seen as justifiable because of the Holocaust. How can these victims possibly be guilty of similar crimes? Or at the very least, we have to give them more leeway. Our priorities to prevent a second Holocaust, and so on. And so Israel has been given a pass in ways that similar states have not been because of this connection. And I think what happened yesterday, and particularly for younger generations and people with a conscience and people with the ability to think for themselves, is that Israel will, till the end of its days, continue to be associated with genocide, but henceforth primarily as an accused perpetrator rather than as a victim of genocide. And I think that is hugely significant when you also consider that in Israel's case, in contrast to many other similar cases, South Africa, French Algeria, East Timor, and so on. For Israel, the support of international public opinion is a vital strategic asset and has been. And that's, it's increasingly been fraying in recent years. But I think this forms a fundamental turning point, a threshold, if you will, has been crossed. Israel has now lost that residual public support that it has enjoyed for so long, and will never be able to recover it. If I could just make one more point, because the other person I quoted in that thread was the late Edward W. Said, who used to make the point that one of the challenges the Palestinians confront is that they are the victims of the victims with a capital V, and that it has been for many people difficult to conceptualize the Palestinians as victims of Israel, because they associate Israel with Jews, Jews with the Holocaust, and therefore, how can this? And it's been in many ways a kind of insurmountable obstacle. Well, that is no more the case. When the World Supreme Court, presided over by an American judge speaking in American English, who, if you look at her professional career, has basically had Israeli impunity baked into her DNA, because she was a former senior State Department lawyer and so on. A court that includes a German judge, other Western judges, an Indian judge, and so on. And these overwhelmingly vote in favor of South Africa, because South Africa presented such a plausible case that the Palestinian that Israel is perpetrating genocide in the Gaza Strip. Well, Palestinians today are no longer, or at least much less so, the victims of the victims. They are the victims of a genocidal state.
Yeah, actually, I want to jump in and add to that. One of the significant, enduring lessons of the Holocaust for Israel was that the Holocaust was possible because Jews were stateless. And this is something like the statelessness of Jews, was, enabled them to be so intensely and horrifically victimized. And so therefore, the establishment of a Jewish state of Israel sort of ties into what Mouin was just saying. But this is something, Hannah Arendt's piece, The Decline of the Nation State and the End of the Rights of Man, really drives home this larger point, sort of the other side of Said's point, is that statelessness is the ultimate form of rightlessness, because states are the arbiters of rights and laws. And we see that now with the case of Palestinians in Gaza. Palestinians are stateless, and it is that condition, on top of all the other geopolitical factors, that has made it debatable or contestable about whether or not the horrific violence that they're being subjected to intentionally, is something that the international community can respond to. But it is this, it kind of reminds us of this sort of enduring truism in a state-centric world, that statelessness is a form of extreme vulnerability, one that, sort of was the lesson Israel was created out of, and has now sought to immunize itself from everything else. Like, its state behavior is one that will sort of will perpetually preserve its interests with the disregard of Palestinian rights. Then there's now, who is going to defend the Palestinians? I think this is a question that South Africa stepped up to the plate, a state bringing a case on behalf of the stateless Palestinians of Gaza. And now all the states that are signatories to the Genocide Convention, 153 of them, need to step up and act in the way that they should in light of this law.
Yes, and today is actually International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and Jewish Voices for Peace released a video calling for the end of Israel's genocide in Palestine, particularly on this day. So let's just take a look at it for a minute. Lisa, I'm always impressed when you come on live and you don't cancel us. Yeah, I know this. I know that I said this live. Yalla.
Dear President Biden,
our families survived the Holocaust.
The world watched as Nazis dehumanized our people,
calling them a dangerous threat.
evil,
vermin.
Our families were rounded up,
Starved, tortured, murdered, burned, and buried in mass graves.
Ordinary people chose silence, looking away.
We understand that the world allowed these horrors to take place,
and that we must act to ensure that this can never happen again.
To anyone.
That's why today, President Biden,
on International Holocaust Remembrance Day,
we are addressing you directly.
The lesson of the Holocaust is never again for anyone.
You have enabled and facilitated the Israeli government's genocide of Palestinians.
And it must stop now.
We have seen this before. A whole people demonized, targeted for slaughter.
Families dying under rubble, pregnant women starved.
Human beings tagged with numbers.
Mass graves and piles of bodies. Children who watched their whole families annihilated.
Men stripped naked or shot in the street.
The Israeli government is committing genocide against Palestinians.
You have responded by sending more weapons into their hands.
As descendants of those who survived the Holocaust,
we demand that you end your complicity. Never again is now.
We will spend this day of remembrance
fighting to stop the genocide of Palestinians.
We believe in a future in which all people,
Palestinian and Israeli,
can live in justice, dignity,
safety, and freedom.
We call on you to demand an immediate ceasefire
and to stop sending weapons to Israel.
Wow.
JVP.
Sorry, I was on mute when I said, indeed, they're leading the charge in words and deeds. So I'd like to move to another realm, which is how this ruling has opened the Pandora's box in terms of what a number of actors, whether it's individuals, groups, organizations, non-state actors and state actors, can now mobilize to advance, first of all, the call for ceasefire, but also a number of other measures that have been taking place for perhaps decades that haven't had the umbrella of international legal legitimacy, simply because this is the world we live in, where the international community is for the most part dominated by a few states, international community always in quotation marks, that have allegiance to Israel or that are sponsors or supporters, primary supporters of the state of Israel, have either blocked such efforts, delegitimized them, and simply persecuted people basically pursuing these calls for Palestinian freedoms, calls that are actually not just completely legitimate, but also are accompanied by a universal call for the freedom of all oppressed peoples, which means literally all oppressed peoples. And this is one of the markers of the struggle for Palestinian liberation. And we all have a duty to continue in this path. So in that sense, if we can just address what are some of these potential mobilizationary actions that we might now witness.
Well, I want to jump in to say that, Mouin has done, a lot of very important, writing and commenting on the inefficacy of the new prosecutor for the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan. And so wondering now whether, Karim Khan can now actually do his job and start pursuing cases. This is not just, the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over genocide, but it also has jurisdiction over all of the gross crimes under international law, all of which have been occurring in Gaza. That is torture, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. And so those crimes, don't have the same kind of intent requirement to prove. They are much more, it's particularly crimes against humanity, which would include starvation, forced displacement, sort of collective punishments, etc. And then war crimes being deliberately targeting civilians, the use of non-discriminating weapons, and other things, all of which we have seen in Gaza, because Gaza is a crime scene. And so I think that while we're talking and thinking about genocide, because it is the crime of crimes and the International Court of Justice is the world court, but there are many other avenues available right now. And I just wonder, Mouin, what are your bets on whether Karim Khan will start doing his job?
Well, as someone put it in relation to him, no can do. So I really wouldn't hold my breath. It would be completely out of character for him to seriously investigate Israel for anything. I would make 2 points on his recent trip to Israel. He referred to the attacks by Hamas on October 7th as crimes that shock the conscience of the entire world. I think those were his exact words. And as you know, Lisa, this is a term that is typically reserved for description of genocide. And so I consider it likely that Khan will bring genocide charges, but he will bring them against Palestinians, not against Israel. And secondly, on that same trip, Khan was full of praise for the Israeli judiciary. And the Israeli judiciary, Lisa, something that you've studied in detail and published a book about. And it is a judiciary that anyone who has seriously looked into has concluded is a sham, has concluded that it is an apparatus that is designed to enable Israeli impunity, and is designed to whitewash Israeli crimes, and is designed to justify the unjustifiable, and is designed to legitimize Israeli actions against the Palestinians, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, and now genocide. And so what I think Khan is going to do is he will go after the Palestinians, because the International Criminal Court deals with individual criminal responsibility, and so it does not states. And so he will go after Hamas and Islamic Jihad leaders and others and indict them and make a big show of that, to show that his investigation is producing results. He will probably go after a few particularly violent settlers as part of that. But then, as far as the criminal responsibility of Israeli leaders and officials and insiders and so on are concerned, he will leave that to the Israeli judicial apparatus, that again has been uniformly found to be a sham, but that he is praising to the high heavens. And the reason he will do so is because the International Criminal Court only pursues cases where national judicial authorities have either failed or refused to hold people accountable for their crimes. And I suspect he will hide behind the Israeli judiciary. On the case of genocide, he will hide behind the International Court of Justice, saying, there's a case already there, so I don't need to do anything. And then he will devote most of his energies to going after Palestinians.
I mean, I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but during the Israeli presentation, when they were presenting their response to the South Africa application, their response was on January 12th. I think that was one of the arguments that Israeli representatives made, like, that yes, some mistakes have been made, but luckily we've got this accountability system all locked up. But I think the point that Mouin is making is an excellent one, and one that almost bears like a broader take. Since over the decades, Israeli lawyers have government lawyers have reinterpreted international law in ways that don't make any international sense, but that in order to bring international law to expand the understandings of international law to encompass the kinds of actions or policies that the Israeli government has pursued. And then, as just to reinforce what Mouin just said, that the High Court of Justice has very often, with very few exceptions, sort of endorsed that. But the thing about international law is that it's international, and there's no reason for us or anyone to necessarily accept the kinds of arguments that are being put forward even now, that Israel has claimed that everything it's doing is perfectly in compliance with international humanitarian law. Like, what international humanitarian law is that allows white phosphorus targeting journalists, blowing up buildings? Yeah, I mean, so it's pure rhetoric backed up with a kind of institutional legacy and tradition of saying that it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Israel's position on genocide. Like, we cannot commit crimes. We are us. We are Israel. Crimes are what other people do. And so, but if you just look at the laws, read the laws, and look at the facts on the ground in terms of what's happened, those kind of arguments that nothing has been done, or very few and exceptional instances of the violations of international law, it's frankly, it's laughable. But that's the position that Israel takes, and so it's one that when is Karim Khan's tenure up, and who can we get a better prosecutor in the ICC?
Well, if I can just briefly respond to that, my understanding is that there are moves afoot to basically call him to account, and even eventually to seek his replacement. I don't know whether the Assembly of State Parties has the right to replace the prosecutor before the end of his term. I don't know whether this public pressure will work. And I should add, I think public pressure on Khan will only be successful if it succeeds in his removal, because I think the prospect that public pressure will compel him to actually do his job, that's simply not going to happen. If I could just respond to the other point that you've made, Lisa, about the Israeli judicial system, the irony of ironies is that in this case, any state, in the ICJ case, any state that does not have a citizen as a judge on the bench is entitled to appoint an ad hoc judge to join the bench. So for the South Africa versus Israel case, South Africa appointed a judge on a very short-term basis because an elected South African judge will become a judge there next month. And the Israelis also utilized this right. And who did they appoint as their judge on the bench? Aharon Barak. And no one is more implicated in the kinds of legal shenanigans, Lisa, that you've been describing than Aharon Barak. He has spent a career justifying the unjustifiable, doing legal and verbal acrobatics and somersaults to legitimize pretty much everything that Israel has done. I mean, all you need to know about this man is that he's probably the individual most praised by Alan Dershowitz. And the interesting thing here is that in 2004, when the ICJ issued its advisory opinion on the West Bank wall, Barak, who was then president, the Chief Justice of the Israeli Supreme Court, basically overturned that, explaining, I have a much better understanding of this case than the judges at the ICJ do. So I keep saying, I don't know if these judges eat dinner together or not, but if they do, to be a fly on the wall, and listen to them ask Barak to explain how he reached a judgment that their advisory opinion could be ignored because Barak was convinced he had a better understanding of the issues.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, if anyone is watching and just wants to read some detailed analysis of Barak's role in cases involving Palestinians, just look up Nimr Sultani's work, which has been great. But one of the things that's interesting, about Barak, he is, we can't understate how significant he is. He's literally the face of a liberal rule of law commitment of the Israeli state. That's the role he's played, the role he has cultivated. He's spends has goes as a visiting professor routinely to Yale University. But one of the things that I was very curious about was that the fact that he did vote with the majority on two instances. One was don't incite genocide, and the other was facilitate the humanitarian aid coming in. And just to put all of this in context, Barak's role specifically, but also what he represents. Prior to the start of this new war, Israel was up in turmoil for a year over Netanyahu's plans to basically gut the judiciary. And in that sense, Aharon Barak was really the face of that which Netanyahu wanted to disempower completely, in terms of just enabling greater uncheckable executive power in there. And so I was just very curious, and I haven't heard anything yet, what the Netanyahu regime's response is to the fact that Barak did vote yes on two of the recommended additional provisional measures.
Yeah. Well, I thought Barak's appointment was very interesting because, as you point out, he's kind of the poster boy for Israel's liberal apartheid. And he has also, for the past year, been the bête noire of the Israeli far right. And there was some opposition among the far right to appointing him. I thought it was actually a clever move by Netanyahu to appoint him, because this is a case about genocide. Harun Barak was born in the Soviet Union during the Second World War, and could well have ended up a victim of the Nazi Holocaust himself, but was saved. He could, and if you read his dissenting opinion, in the first part of it, he recounts his personal experiences as a child in, I think it was Latvia or Lithuania, during the 1940s. Well, perhaps quite moving testimony, but completely irrelevant, because one of the unique aspects of genocide is it doesn't matter what's happened to you or who did it. You can never justify it, even if you are yourself the victim of genocide. So even if, for the sake of argument, Israel was the victim of genocide on October 7th, this gives it 0.0 justification or legitimization to subsequently engage in genocide against the Palestinians. In other words, even if that genocide is perpetrated against those who you accuse of having perpetrated genocide against you. And then in the second part of his dissenting opinion, he basically tries to revive this myth of the most moral army in the world that fights according to the doctrine of purity of arms and so on. I think at one point he says every Israeli soldier has a copy of international law in their backpack as they go into battle, and are held accountable for it and all the rest of it. And he more or less tries to claim personal responsibility for Israel's unprecedentedly scrupulous adherence to the laws of war and international law. And on this basis, he then explains why he voted against the provisional measures. And then he says that he voted for the two, the incitement and the other one, because I think his reasoning was those are already Israeli obligations, and I'm merely reconfirming them. I'd have to go back and check to look at that. So I mean, it was an interesting opinion to look at, and I suspect the reason he voted for those two is because Hamas is not a party to the Genocide Convention. It can't be a party because it's not a state. Yet, the ruling yesterday did include a clause. It wasn't one of the provisional measures, but it did have a paragraph that referred to the captives in the Gaza Strip and called for their immediate and unconditional release. It may well have been the case that that was the price that other judges had to pay towards Barak and perhaps a few others to get their consent to vote for these two provisional measures. That there was kind of, negotiating and exchange, and that this was agreed upon. And it may also have been the case that, Barak does have a reputation that he presumably wants to uphold and wants to present himself as being more than just not only Israel's representative, but even Netanyahu and Ben Gvir and Smotrich's flunky. So this was perhaps also a way for him to show that, no, I'm here as an independent judge. I judge everything on the merits, and therefore I voted for these two provisional measures. And of course, some of, excuse me, some on the Israeli far right have now been denouncing him and saying this is precisely why we opposed his appointment in the first place, as if, any other Israeli judge would not also have been outvoted 16-1 and 16-2.
Right. Well, it's sort of even that kind of rhetoric or position is, belies the idea that, is this a court of,
Exactly.
exact. I think that, Barak, the two things he voted for the very reasons, I just want to concur with you that, those two provisional measures are the ones that are, sort of least controversial. And also, the whole issue of incitement, it's kind of an like a little bit of a slap on, Netanyahu and Herzog and others. But even on the finding, where it becomes completely, where he is functioning as a political flunky, is this notion, like the fact that some of the statements proving or demonstrating intent to commit Jewish genocide include, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's, take the gloves off, more so, and sort of a limit, do what you will, all the restrictions have been lifted,
Yeah.
and then seeing soldiers basically acting without any kind of restrictions in their, not only the aerial bombing but the on the ground invasion. And so one can say, like, we sort of, this kind of issue that we're talking about right now really demonstrates something so much bigger about what's happened in Gaza, the Gaza war. It's like, what are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? It's that kind of thing. And we're further, the one thing I would just say that it's very valuable about the ICJ ruling and all the attention this issue is getting now is people, some places, basically believing their own eyes now, and having a little, that the ICJ telling them, you're not crazy, you are actually seeing what it looks like. You are seeing a genocidal campaign against, defenseless civilians in a densely populated and now largely wrecked strip of land.
Yeah, I think in his the fateful triangle, Noam Chomsky in his discussion of Israel's 1982 invasion of Lebanon and terror bombing of Beirut over the summer of 1982. I believe it was Norman Podhoretz who he quotes as having written, much of what you have seen and even more of what you have heard is simply not true. And it was such a jarring statement. It's always stuck with me. Well, that may be absolutely outrageous, absurd, and false statement as it is. That may be something you could have written in 1982, where you only had access to 2 or 3 news bulletins a year and a day, and printed newspaper that came out, the following day discussing old news. But I think in today's day and age, that kind of attempt to basically tell people to ignore what they're repeatedly confronted with and is confirmed that it's not AI or Photoshop, it's a bit rich. Yet we're seeing similar attempts.
Mhm. Right. I mean, or even just, what we're seeing and then the interpretations of what
Yes.
this means, that it's all like human bombs and human shields and Hamas tunnels. It's like there are just, it's such a staggering, gap between what is happening and what people who are supporting or apologizing or not apologizing, but defending Israel are saying is happening. And so I think this is a crucial time, and we can, keep one eye on the issue of the genocide case, but all, the other eye should be on all the other kinds
Exactly.
of crimes being perpetrated against Palestinians that are unabated.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I would like to interject on the one hand to give you guys a break because it's been an hour and 20 minutes. I want to give you a break by showing a video, which actually will be contextual because we had invited Noura Erakat and Diana Bhutto. Diana Bhutto will join us tomorrow at 12. I hope you two can come back, but it's up to you. 12 Eastern time. And RD MCs could not join us at all. So I will, instead of, and Noura will be in flight tomorrow. So we will be showing a 4-minute video that was a quick on-the-go response by Noura, which also addresses a number of things that many have asked for, whether in the chat here or elsewhere. So in lieu of having her be live with us, I'll show this video. It's an informal video that was shot on the go right after the ruling. But before that, let me just share that there is a question that someone asked, and I put it here on the screen. Does a charge of genocide require the means to carry it out? And that is something that a lot of people have asked, especially in reference to October 7th and the attack that took place by Hamas, and whether that constitutes genocide, even if there is an explicit intent, because the issue is here whether capacity needs to be available or required in order for a genocide to be carried out. Now, I will allow you to think about this, and then I'll play the video, and then we will come back to you guys in just a little bit. All right? Does that make sense?
Sure.
All right. Sorry, let me get you all up here, and let me do the video. This is Noura Erakat yesterday. Oh, wow. Actually,
I can text you the video.
no, I have the captioned video. So what I will do is I will ask you to answer the question, and then we'll go to the video. Is that okay?
Sure.
Sure.
So this is the capacity.
I'll defer to Lisa. I think you're in a better position to answer this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an excellent question, and I think it's one that there's not a rock solid answer to. I mean, the issue of intent has often been, the stumbling block, like really proving the intent to destroy a people in whole or in part. And so for so many of the genocides in the decades since 1948 that were perpetrated without, any kind of consequences. I mean, including, we could take the example of the regime of Saddam Hussein, and the mass killing of Kurds in the north during the Anfal campaign. Anywhere between 180 and 350,000 Kurds were killed, and Saddam Hussein's, sort of dodging of the genocide allegations against him, there was never a case, was that they Kurds, traitors and traitors and enemies of the state. But one can say that that question of intent, and does that apply to October 7th, or does that apply to Hamas's thing? That would be an interest. That's a question. But the capacity to destroy, I think, is an integral component of when one is really going to try to wed intent to the actions themselves. And so, again, I think that that's a very good and important question. It doesn't have a solid answer. And if one just looks at the record of genocides, one can see that, it's so many things that have, actually been truly genocidal have never been, treated as such. And so the killing of ultimately 1,000 or somewhat around 1,200 people, some of whom were killed by Israeli military itself in their frantic response to the attack. And we can say that that's, that would be a difficult case to prove if one were looking at the facts and the legacy of the Genocide Convention. What do you think, Mouin?
Well, I think capacity to conduct a genocide in terms of having the appropriate weaponry and so on is probably a fairly low bar. I mean, you don't need a nuclear arsenal to perpetrate a genocide. And if you look at the genocide in Rwanda, for example, much of the killing was carried out using matches, if you will, or machetes, or revolvers and submachine guns, rather than heavy artillery or an air force. Whether what happened on October 7th can in any way be successfully prosecuted as an act of genocide is a different question. And I think, first of all, I've seen no significant evidence that would point to genocidal intent in terms of statements made by Palestinian leaders. Certainly, when you compare it to what the Israeli leadership has been saying. Secondly, of course, you can infer genocidal intent from actions, and here we're talking about a total of approximately 1,100 dead. At least 350 to 400 of whom were uniformed soldiers located on military bases, and a portion of the remainder that were killed either in crossfire or by Israeli or by the Israeli military, as you said, in its frenzied efforts to reconquer territory in southern Israel that had been seized by Hamas, and was basically using the same methods to reconquer its own territory that it typically uses against Palestinians. So that leaves a few hundred unarmed Israeli civilians, theoretically.
Well,
yeah,
I mean, one of the things, it sort of illuminates sort of the appeal of the allegation of genocide, the idea, because genocide is a crime of crimes. I mean, one can say, like, what happened on October 7th, it was war crimes, deliberately killing civilians and taking hostages. Those are war crimes, or crimes against humanity. I think that that's a probably more realistic frame, but it is, enticing, and especially because of the fact that now Israel has been plausibly accused of genocide, and that's been found in the ICJ, to kind of like whataboutism, with October 7th as the
Yeah, I mean, I guess theoretically, killing a few hundred people could be an act of genocide, certainly if it's part of a broader campaign, but it would require, again, plausible, it would require genocidal intent, and the requirement that there is no other plausible explanation for these acts. So, I'm sure Karim Khan will do his best to serve Israel and the UK and the US, but I personally don't see a serious case here.
Right. I mean, even
Also,
just go ahead. Sorry.
خليني احكي ليسا. No,
No, I was just going to say that the intent issue is, the fact that it seems, if just based on reporting, that Hamas's intent was to take hostages in order to negotiate the release of Palestinian prisoners. I mean, so no matter how horrible some of Hamas's rhetoric may be, that was probably the intent
Yeah,
of what
and if
happened on October 7th.
yes, and if I could just add one point, Bassam, if you don't mind, the largest number of Israeli civilian casualties in a single incident was at this rave that, for fairly obscene reasons, was being held within spitting distance of the concentration camp that is the Gaza Strip. But the propriety thereof notwithstanding, that was the incident in which the largest number of Israeli civilians were killed. Now, Israeli intelligence has since said that this was not a pre-planned operation because Hamas did not know about this rave until its fighters stumbled upon it. Now, that doesn't, by definition, arguably exclude genocidal intent. There does appear to have been a massacre there, but if you don't even know these people are there, that would seem to me to kind of contradict a case of textbook genocide, if you will.
Great.
I wanted to share one thing, and that is, isn't there something to say about relational power or force? In other words, it's one thing to say that intent is what is required, and the bar for the weaponry that might be utilized is the bar is low when the other side doesn't possess much more, much powerful weaponry. But so isn't there a relational power issue here? Like let's say someone decided to carry out a genocide with a manifesto even against, say, not North Korea. All right, I don't know. I just came up with that, and they started doing something, and they injured somebody in the process in North Korea. Is that ground for genocide?
Well, I mean, it would have to be the intent to destroy the people.
Yes, the intent
as
is
such.
to destroy the people of North Korea. It's just one individual with a manifesto. I mean, I just would like to learn more about this.
Well, I mean, I don't think, again, it's a good question. Like the Genocide Convention was the first human rights law. I don't think they'd kind of conceived of all of possibilities and scenarios. And they were looking at what the Nazis had done. And so there's not a relational dimension in the sense that genocide can be a completely one-way phenomenon, but there isn't, sort of any, I mean, maybe in jurisprudence, it's happened in, since the 1990s, we can think about the intensity of violence or whatever, but there isn't per se anything in the law that kind of clearly defines what the intent to destroy or the means. I mean, they do the different categories of killing people, preventing births, et cetera, but or it doesn't. People have often said you don't have to kill a lot of people to engage in genocide based on the definition, but there are, all of those factors have to come together: the intent to destroy people as such, and then the, sort of the engagement of actions to fulfill that intent.
All right, thank you so much, Lisa. Thanks, I appreciate that. It's just something that simply logically kind of doesn't make sense, but I guess these conventions were produced in a particular context, and we will learn more. Lisa, I know that you might have to go, so would you like to share any last words, or do you want to stay with us for much longer?
No, I'm afraid I do have to go, but if you're going to share the footage of Noura's immediate response to the ICJ ruling, I just think it was so powerful and so moving, and probably captured what so many people think. So I would say, I'll be listening to it as I go. But great to see you, Bassam. Thank you.
Could I just mention I need to leave as well, and I fully agree with Lisa.
معين انت ما فيك تروح لانه we still
You're
have
not
one
allowed to go.
question with UNRWA very quickly right after the video. معلش.
All right. Well, yeah, we'll do it briefly.
Okay, طيب. All right, so let's do the.
Bye, Lisa.
Bye, Lisa.
Bye.
All right, and I guess we will postpone the questions from the audience until tomorrow when you're back with us with Diana Butu, Mouin, if that's okay. طيب, let's go to the video.
Sabaha, like many of you, I watched the ICJ provide its decision this morning on South Africa's request for provisional measures against Israel, charging it with genocide and failure to prevent genocide. I was incredibly stressed out when I heard Judge Donahue begin by starting the context on October 7th, as opposed to the way that the South African team had began by providing us context of 75 years of settler colonization and within the framework of ongoing Nakba. And so I braced myself, understanding that this court was never going to save us, but that this court could also be a great source of harm. And so was relieved. My primary feeling was relief when they didn't do that. And it was also, some of it was vindication of the things that we've been saying, that Palestinians have been saying, that millions have lifted up, that there is at least plausible reason to believe that Israel is committing genocide and failure to prevent genocide. This was a really, really low bar, folks. Had the court failed to do that, it would have been really an indictment of international law itself, as opposed to whether or not what we see is true with our very eyes. They would have been gaslighting us, but it would have been an indictment of the entire system. What the court found was that there was, in fact, plausible reason to believe that Israel was committing genocide and or failing to prevent it. And they affirmed that there was a risk of irreparable harm to Palestinians should Israel be allowed to continue. They affirmed with near unanimity, ordered all of the provisional measures requested by South Africa, stopping short of the issuing an order for a cessation of military hostilities, which was already a long shot. And in all cases, even had they provided that order, it wouldn't have been sufficient to do anything. It would still be in our hands to now take this ruling and to agitate globally amongst our international, amongst our respective governments, to continue to isolate Israel and the United States politically, to continue to demand an imposition of weapons sanctions, to continue to demand that other countries hold Israeli individuals to account under universal jurisdiction, to continue to demand that these governments, like Italian Parliament and otherwise, cease the provision of military weapons to Israel. The duty is still ours. It was never relinquished. And so there is obviously mixed feelings because it wasn't everything that was asked for. Given the circumstances, it was a lot. It was a lot. It was an affirmation. It was already a low bar. There's still yet to be seen what's going to happen at the merit stage, but the court rejected every single one of Israel's arguments, acknowledged and lifted up what multilateral institutions and individuals have told us about what's happening on the ground, about the targeting of civilians, the indiscriminate bombardment, the deprivation of water and electricity, the creation of the conditions of life that would be calculated to bring about the destruction of a people in whole or in part, and an order of the provisions, if you were listening like me, the near unanimity. It was almost 15-2 on almost all the questions, 16-1 on one of them. The outstanding judge who was the outlier wasn't, in fact, Barak, who was the judge appointed by Israel temporarily, but it was in fact Judge Sabatunde of Uganda. So that's where we're at now. It's more to be seen. We never relinquished power. This work continues. We continue. We have to now continue to agitate for a ceasefire now and for accountability. Whatever this court says, it was just going to be the beginning. I'm grateful and relieved it's not the worst of what they could have done. And obviously, I didn't expect that, I didn't rule out the worst, because this is what international law is and its institutions do. And had they been functioning in the way that we expected to from the beginning, we wouldn't be here at 75 years. We wouldn't be witnessing a Gaza Nakba 2023. Yalla.
Well, there we go. Mouin, I know that we kept you too long, and I know you have to,
Powerful words.
yeah, powerful words. I know we kept too long. Any comments on what Noura, is there anything that that you would like to share in reference to the commentary, especially on how this opens the door?
No, I think her words speak for themselves. Was she in The Hague, by the way?
No, she was walking back from dropping our daughter at school.
Okay, no, because I saw the rain, so I thought it might have been The Hague. But no, I mean, indeed,
You know, it does rain beyond The Hague.
I'm not according to my information. But no, powerful words, and she points out that, you know, this could have gone in a very different way, especially given concerns that existed about the way that the court is structured. Even though the judges are not diplomats taking instructions from their capitals, but nevertheless, this could have gone in a very different way if the court had decided to approach this topic on other than its merits. And I think the most important point she makes is this is not the end of something. This is the beginning of something, and this opens new possibilities. I mean, to now accuse Israel of being a genocidal state can no longer be dismissed as rhetoric, can no longer be dismissed as polemics, can no longer be denounced and delegitimized as anti-Semitism, whatever that term is supposed to mean these days.
All right.
It's now a serious charge.
Tayyip, before I let you go, we don't have to actually address this today, but we can address this tomorrow, where the UK, I think Canada, Australia, the US have actually paused their funding for UNRWA. So perhaps we can address it tomorrow, but any last words here? I know I'm abusing your time.
No, that's fine. I would like to start by saying that this item is very much related to what we've been discussing for the last 90 minutes. And how is it related? Well, Israel, purely by coincidence, of course, was planning to issue a press release yesterday around the same time as the International Court of Justice was issuing its ruling, claiming that 12 UNRWA employees had confessed to being part of the military wing of Hamas, I believe, and having participated in the October 7th attacks. You know, as Israeli apologists and propagandists have been saying, oh, UNRWA is the armed wing of Hamas. So these are accusations that, according to my understanding, are based on statements extracted by Israeli intelligence operatives under interrogation in Israeli prison. UNRWA, the UN agency, United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestine refugees in the Middle East, was apprised that this was going to happen and decided to jump the gun by issuing a press statement of its own, both to deal with the accusations against its staff and in order to conduct some damage control vis-a-vis its Western funders, where it gets most of its funding. I think UNRWA spectacularly miscalculated, because what it did is, instead of saying it had received serious charges that require a full and transparent and independent investigation, and that if these charges are found to be true, they will take measures, instead of, for example, placing these accused employees on administrative leave or suspending them, instead of pointing out that in addition to these 12 accused, out of something like 13,000 employees, they would additionally like to note that more UN employees have been killed in this conflict than in any other conflict, and that almost all of them have been UNRWA employees, and that they will be investigating that as well. Instead of also perhaps finding a way to informally alert their press contacts that Israel routinely engages in these kinds of accusations against UNRWA and its staff, and that these accusations are routinely subsequently determined to be based on nothing and are either presented in bad faith or fraudulently formulated and so on. Instead of doing any of that, what the UNRWA leadership instead did is it came out with a statement pointing out that 12 of its staff have been accused of participation in the Palestinian attacks of October 7th, offered a lengthy denunciation of terrorism, announced that it had fired these employees, not suspended them, but fired them, and that a full investigation would be started forthwith. Well, did that result in damage control with its funders? No, because it sounded more like a confirmation of the Israeli accusations and an admission of guilt. And so all these Western states, Israel has been trying to get rid of UNRWA for decades. There's been an incessant campaign against UNRWA in the United States and on the European far right for reasons that I won't get into here. But basically, the US, the UK, and now some other countries have latched onto the combination of the Israeli statement and the UNRWA response to use that as a pretext to suspend their funding to the agency. And here I'd just like to note what I thought was a very perceptive comment by Sarah Leah Whitson, the former Middle East director at Human Rights Watch and now the executive director of DAWN, Democracy for the Arab World Now, in which she pointed out it took Blinken, the US Secretary of State Blinken, basically the blink of an eye to suspend US funding for UNRWA in response to these as yet unproven allegations. Contrast that with Israel's genocidal assault on the Palestinians in Gaza, which is now going to be the subject of formal hearings at the world's highest court. What has been his response to that? To go around Congress twice in order to authorize expedited deliveries of arms and high explosives to Israel, so that this genocidal assault can be more efficiently conducted. So again, Western hypocrisy. One never needs to take anything that Western governments say about human rights and the rule of law and accountability and so on seriously. It's all just hot air, but I think it is worth pointing out the hypocrisy here.
Thank you, Mouin. I really appreciate you staying with us. If you stayed with us for 14 more minutes, it will be actually 3 hours. So maybe you can beat that record next time. We will be back the next day, tomorrow at 12 p.m. with Dan Abutu. If you can join us, that would be a treat. Your name is already on the flyer. Yeah, sorry. And we will continue the discussion. There's a lot that we would like to discuss, including some of the comments made online by everyone from lawyers to laypersons supporting the state of Israel, saying things such as the court did not call for a ceasefire, but it did impose on Hamas to return the hostages immediately, and so on and so forth.
Actually, just to interrupt, that's incorrect. The court did have a paragraph about the captives in the Gaza Strip and their immediate release, but that was not a provisional order.
Yeah, this is precisely why I'd like to talk about this, because there are other kinds of implications. And what's interesting is that, and as you know, Mouin, we are following almost every a significant chain of threads, not every tweet. And these types of claims are circulating like crazy.
Of course.
It's unbelievable. And precisely probably because there's not much else to circulate to sort of glean from this something that could be like a ray of light.
What are you going to circulate? The body count?
Exactly. All right. So thank you, Mouin. I'll
Thank
let you go. And then
okay,
take care. And
you too.
Salam. Yalla, bye. Okay, so I don't usually do this. We've never done this actually, but there are a couple of comments that have been sent. We will be taking the comments tomorrow in a more organized fashion. And if I could just show some of these comments. So I'll just go through them in a few minutes and then we'll break because I don't know what you guys are doing here 3 hours after. All right, so there we go. This is a comment from, let me put the comment up here. This is a comment from Sam saying, Bassam lead the ICJ cases like Bosnia versus Serbia. The killing has to be a significant part of the group. Basically, this is a response to the idea that can a genocide be carried out by somebody who cannot actually carry out a genocide, like a human being who just has the intent, which is what is one of the conditions to have the intent, but then of course if that person doesn't have the capacity in reference to the power of the other adversary or of the adversary, then is it considered a genocide? So this is just a comment. There are many comments. I'm just trying to flag some. I apologize. There's no way we can do. Anti-Semitism is when you oppose U.S. foreign policy in West Asia. I mean, no, because there are many very, very important and powerful anti-Semites or people who have made expressly anti-Semitic claims, such as Elon Musk and Donald Trump, but they still apparently support U.S. foreign policy in West Asia. So, yeah. And then yesterday, a few Democrats have started to question Biden, and there's a slew of comments on that. And that's because, according to some of the comments here, but also according to reality, a lot of people are feeling that their career is jeopardized by their allegiance to Biden in certain circles and areas. So this is not ubiquitous. And then a comment on Diana Bhutto, who is joining us tomorrow at 12. This person, Khubza, says, Diana Bhutto said this is the end of Israeli impunity, accountability now. So we'll talk to Diana about this more tomorrow. And then finally, long live South Africa and Yemen for their support of oppressed people. And that is that. So we will stop here. I hope that we can you can join us tomorrow. I just realized that the comments that I put on the feed did not appear, I think, because I didn't have the right button pushed, but that's okay. See you all tomorrow. I apologize for the power outage that took place at 11:30. Beyond that, just stay safe, take care, and keep the